when you use words that carry a low frequency energetically, it affects you physiologically.
And hey, folks, we are back with another Elevated Trader podcast, and we have started a new book. We have started the new Trading for a Living book by Alexander Elder, and super excited. Always love starting a new book. We are going to be doing part 1 in this episode of part 1 of the book. Kristen, you are once again with me. I love it. Just what do you think so far? What are your thoughts?
Very interesting.
Very interesting.
5 or 6 years ago, 6 years-ish, give or take, I was just digesting a lot of trading books, mostly in Audible. And I really thought that I had actually listened to this one. And I think what I did is I purchased this one and it sat on the shelf. And the only reason I say that is because now I'm reading it and now I know I didn't read it or listen to it before. So it's kind of like one of the other books. What was the book that took me by surprise right out of the gate? Man's Search for Meaning. Oh, yeah. That one was like, whoa, I don't know what this is about. And this is just like deep. And so this one, I didn't know what it was about. So I had thought I did and I didn't. And yeah, a little bit of an eye opener, but it's a good time. Good time.
I have not read this one either, and it's always been on my list to read, and I'm reading it now. And you know what I'm finding really intriguing is actually the voice, the actual voice of the author. I'm hearing it very much so, because he's a Russian. Well, I wouldn't say back when the Soviet Union was still existent. So he defected from the Soviet Union, came to the United States, and he is a psychiatrist. Is that what he is? Or is he a doctor? Yeah.
He's a doctor of psychiatry. Yep. He's got all his degrees. Mm-hmm.
But the personality of the Europeans have a tendency of being very blunt, very forward, very direct. And I can hear it very much so in his writing. So that's really something that I'm trying to, there's no sugarcoating. Let's just put it that way.
Yeah. Like it would probably come across as a little harsh if you didn't know that background.
Yeah.
And you didn't know that about Europeans. Like you just didn't know. I mean, then I was just going to say, like, the northeastern states have a tendency to be harsh, with their comments and their verbiage and their personalities. It is what it is. Like, sorry, if you're from the area, they usually know it. And so,
yeah.
But if we think about it, that was the melting pot of those countries. So,
yeah.
Got it.
But
okay.
That being said, I mean, we're reading this book and I know that there's some verbiage in it that's affecting both you and me and really catching our attention. So did you want to touch on that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, okay, so you've probably heard, if you've listened to the other podcasts or other episodes of this podcast, that I have a thing for words or energy or frequencies and mindset and all that stuff. And it's a thing. You can measure it. There's a ton of science around it. But when you use words that carry a low frequency energetically, it affects you physiologically, not just mentally, but that's all together, right? You are energy. So he does use one word in particular, and in part 1, we're going to maybe go back and forth in this area here of part 1, but he does use the fact he would like us to use and get up and say something like, I am a loser. And that rubbed me the wrong way right out of the gate. But I kept reading and I was like, have an open mind for a minute to get his perspective. Why is he saying that? All that stuff. And so I understand his why, but I don't agree with using that word. So we discussed this morning off mic, and it was, what word would I replace that with to set the tone before I sit in front of a computer? And so when you read this book, or if you read this book, it's not like I'm a loser, and so that's supposed to put you in this amazing mindset to trade better. I don't agree with that. I agree with, like, I am learning to win and do better at my trading every day, because you and I both know you can still be a very successful trader with winning and losing. Like, and then I don't even like the word losing. We talked about that on another podcast with, like, losing, being a loser, and failure. What was the acronym that Tanya said in the other podcast? She said, fail the fails acronym is first attempt and learning.
Yeah, first attempt in learning. I like that. I
Love
like that.
that so
Yeah, love
much.
it.
So,
Yeah.
anyways, learning steps. Um, and you and I are famous for saying, what is it? Failure is only if you don't get up and
Yeah.
try again. So,
Exactly. It's only if you don't get up. If you don't recover from it, don't learn
so
from it.
yeah, exactly. So, what's, anything, what stood out most for you? What'd you get out of this first part?
Yeah. So the thing that actually stood out, and I'll read what it said. So the first thing that stood out to me the most was actually, and of course they use the word loser. A loser is not undercapitalized. His mind is underdeveloped, and that was probably one of my biggest takeaways from this. Not that I didn't
Mm.
know that, but I actually, it was so succinctly put and so accurate. Now, I wanted to talk a little bit about what that means because I hear it again and again and again. My account was just too small. My account's too small. I don't have enough capital. That's why I'm losing. I lost the account because it just wasn't big enough. I just need a bigger account.
The
These are all,
victim.
yeah, these are all reasons why individuals or reasons that people throw out there of why their account. Well, if I just had $1 million account, then I'd be making money. If I just had a $2 million account, I'd be making money.
Commissions,
Oh
broker
yeah,
fees.
yeah,
Yeah, you hear it all. It's all victim mentality.
it is. And I'll tell you, I I can guarantee, well, at least for me, I can guarantee that a bigger account is not going to make me a better trader. In fact, it'll make me a worse trader because I'm not ready for it.
Mm-hmm.
I'm ready for the account size that I currently have, and that's my
Mm-hmm.
comfort. And even this year, I increased my R. And for those of you that don't know what an R is, that's the amount of risk that you put onto a trade. And in dollar value, let's just say I had $100 R. This year I doubled it, made it to $200 R. That's not my real R, but I'm just saying that that's what it would mean. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So when I did that, that fear all of a sudden that I thought I had under control started jumping back in. So I guarantee having a bigger account does not make you a more successful trader or give you better odds of being successful. In this particular case, it does not take money to make money. And we've heard that before, right? So that plays into that whole undercapitalized. But the part that really stood out, like I said, it was so succinct, was it's not because a loser is not undercapitalized. Their mind is underdeveloped. And it's all here. It's the mindset, right? And that's the difference. You've thrown around the word victim a few times already since I've mentioned this. And what this really comes down to is lack of accountability, right? It comes down to a lack of accountability, not being willing to take responsibility for the trades that you make, the decisions that you make, the effort that you put in, the risk that you put on the table, all of those different things. I don't know if that stood out to you at all, but
Well, I can agree with that. I also would like to add to that, though, that I think most people that have a victim mentality or are using victim mentality verbiage, they don't know it. To me, it's a let me back up. It's a learned behavior, and you probably picked it up somewhere. So again, be kind to yourself. If you've like, oh, that's me, don't get down on yourself. Don't get hard on yourself. You just need to practice self-awareness. And then with that comes with, okay, I just said that. I don't agree with it. I want to change. I want to better. I want to be better. I want to talk better. I want to think better about myself and then change it. Whether that's writing affirmations and putting sticky notes on your bathroom window, like whatever it takes. Tracy and I catch ourselves when we are talking bad about ourselves, we will call each other out on it and have a friend, you know, tell somebody that means something to you and is around you a bunch that when I talk negative about myself, do not allow me to do that. That perpetuates going down a path that I just don't think is successful.
well, it plays into that whole energy thing that you were talking about earlier too, right? So it gets your mind and your own frequency into that negative energy, that negative space. And you know, this is kind of a side note, but I dislike gossip. I
Mm,
dislike participating in it. I dislike being part of it. And I see people do it and it's like, well, it's just for fun. Like they're not hurting anybody. And
Ugh.
the problem is, and I'm talking about even relationships, right? You know, how you get together and there'll be a group and they start bad mouthing their spouse. And I've just never been one to partake in that. I don't agree with it because if you take any particular negative, because we all have them, we are all flawed. We all have little idiosyncrasies that little things that can somebody find irritating. I'm sure all of you listeners could probably find something irritating about myself or about Kristen. I'm pretty sure you could. The thing is if we take that and we focus on it and we give attention to it and energy to it, it ends up making all of the other little tiny idiosyncrasies or little tiny issues bigger. And it gets bigger and bigger and bigger. And negativity breeds negativity. And it expounds how you feel about a certain individual. And I've experienced this in my own life where I have been sitting in a room and somebody says something negative about somebody, and all of a sudden it's caught my attention. And then I'm like, I don't say anything about it, but all of a sudden that's there, it's planted. And I have noticed, because I'm very self-aware, I have noticed how my opinion has shifted slightly towards that individual the next time I see him. And that's an obstacle that I then have to work through and overcome and rid that bad seed that's been planted in my brain. And when we do this to ourselves, even, we're planting those seeds of negativity and growing it into a tree. And the fastest way to overcome that is to start focusing just on the positive. Focus on the
Mhm.
positive, and that negative starts to get smaller and smaller. It's really about putting light in a dark room, right?
Yep. Or focus on gratitude. We've
Yeah.
we've learned that a lot from
Yeah.
people that idolize is the wrong word, that we believe have good information to teach others.
I've seen the power of it, and it makes a huge difference. And thank you, Kristen, because you are a constant reminder to me of that. Because that's one of my failures, or I wouldn't say failures. It's one of my
Ooh.
pitfalls. It's one of the areas that I've struggled with, is that negative self-talk, and I fall into that regularly. And you have been such a blessing to have in my life to
Oh,
call me out on that and help rewire that brain chemistry so that it's becoming less of a habit. So
yeah.
thank you.
You're
Yeah.
welcome. You're so sweet. Well, it's also like a couple twofold, right? Where you're just hard on yourself. And we
Mm.
usually, as humans, we can look in the mirror and usually we are harder on ourselves than we are on anybody else in our lives. Right. And you're just like, Tracy, like, why did I do that? That was dumb. Like, I'm like, well, hold on a minute. No, I'm just kidding. But you know what I mean? Like, it's the little things that we just have to be a little kinder to ourselves. And then somebody once said something once and I know I've said it to you, but someone did it to me where I was talking bad at myself or about myself or something. And they said, well, don't talk about my friend like that.
Love
And I
that.
was like,
Yeah.
I love that so much.
Yeah.
So much. So, wow, we just went down a rabbit hole of like using your words. I guess maybe that's interesting that we did that because I'm wondering there's more to this. I know something else that stood out to you, and at first I think you just don't like it, and I'm gonna take it and like digest. I'm gonna like, can I? I'll just bring it up.
Yeah.
He compares traders to alcoholics.
Oh,
Yep, and at first I can see how that could offend people. I myself was not brought up by alcoholics. I actually don't have any. I've never been exposed to a true straight up alcoholic where it's like destroyed their lives. But I have met many people that have either been significantly affected by alcoholism or I meet people that are been in AA for years, decades and all these things. So what he does is he was invited because he's a psychiatrist, right? So he goes to an AA meeting and he's sitting in the back of the room because he's just curious, right? And he's like, if we traded each word, what were the words that if you traded them out? It doesn't really matter. Basically,
trade alcohol for lose or losses. Trade alcohol for losses. That's what he
Okay.
said. Yeah.
So I've never been to an AA meeting, but that's where this book is headed. And I am actually interested because I have no clue. All I know is the
Mm.
saying is the first step is admitting the problem. And then I think there's like 12 or 13 steps. I don't know.
Yeah. And let's just specify, because I don't think he's comparing all traders to alcohol or to
No,
AA.
yeah, just the ones where it's
He's
destroying their life.
comparing, yeah, he's comparing the ones that are blowing out their accounts, the ones that are having considerable losses, the ones that are over trading, the ones that are, I mean, those habits are very synonymous with Gamblers Anonymous or alcohol. It's a
Yes,
problem.
yes,
It's an
yes.
issue, right? And what do you need to get down? The problem that I have with that comparison is that it speaks to not necessarily being able to fix the problem. It's still a lack of accountability to me, and that's kind of the
Hmm.
area that I'm a little iffy about. I'm not quite sure, because maybe it is an issue, but the difference between alcoholism and trading, there's actually a chemical makeup structure, and maybe that exists within traders. I don't know, but either
Well,
way,
I
that's where
think
I
it
kind of have
does.
a, yeah,
Yeah,
I
I think it.
yeah.
Well, okay, let's back up. You defined it as not just all traders, right? It's the extremists that are hiding, borrowing, getting loans, constantly ripping through money, and where it's life altering in a negative way and repeatable patterns that are destructive. So there's the clarification, right? Between a trader and alcoholics that need AA and someone that's just constantly destroying their accounts. I think that's really honestly how we don't want to go down that route.
Yeah. But even all of those groups, even in that group, I think that there's probably only a small amount of them that would actually have a gambling addiction or a problem that way. It's it could be some other personal development issue that's at heart, like a pride issue or an arrogance issue or a get rich quick scheme, or a like just the mentality itself of not really understanding what you're doing and how you're doing it, and thinking that if you just keep doing it the same way, eventually you'll hit it rich. It's so I don't know. I mean, it would be like comparing everybody that buys a lottery ticket to and I don't know. Anyway, that's just kind of the way that I'm thinking, but we'll see
Yeah,
how it
yeah,
unfolds.
exactly. That's what I'm thinking.
Yeah, we take something away from every one of these books, right? And
Yep.
it is what it is. Well, now I told you what my kind of biggest takeaway was from the book. I have one other, but what about yours so far? What stood out to
Hmm.
you?
Well, the fact that this book started comparing traders and that we're getting ready to be taught the lessons of AA in a comparison to be a better trader.
Mm-hmm.
I already talked about how I'm going to be watching the verbiage that he's using and still keep it in the same tonality with the same strength, but just changing it just a hair. Maybe, but
Mm-hmm.
hopefully by the next episode, I will have figured that out because I just read that part last night. Did anything else stand out? I thought it was interesting. This is not really what answering your question, so to speak, but that we went from the Brian Buffini immigrant edge to another immigrant. Just and by the way, we pick these books randomly. We'll
Oh
just say,
yeah.
okay, what's our next book? It was time for a trading book. She goes, okay, because it was not the book we were going to read. For months, we had another book in line. So I tend to believe, and I like to believe that there are no coincidences, and I already know that I will get something out of this. Matter of fact, Tracy's like, I think you're going to get something really good out of this book, and I was like, oh, I just don't know. But I did so much more reading in it. I'm like, you know what? Some way, shape, or form, I am going to make myself get some stuff out of this. I want to improve. I want to be better. So let's go.
It's interesting because I was asked this morning actually about the Money Grows on Trees book that we did in our first podcast.
First
And
podcast, first episodes.
yeah, and they asked, is it worth a read? And they mentioned another book they had just read, and they said they didn't really get, a lot out of it that they didn't already know. And I said, well, I when we did the podcast on the episode, I had read that. That was the second time I had read the book. And I got so many different things out of it. And it had nothing to do with what was actually written on the page. It had to do with the book actually provoking thought that allowed me to process some thoughts, that allowed emotions to come up that I then processed. Mm-hmm. And through that whole process of understanding and learning, that was the revelation. Those parts were the revelation. It had nothing, it wasn't written on the actual page. It's the very process of influencing and inspiring new thought. And that is what can come from some of these books that we read. So,
well, if you haven't read that book, you could go read the book, or you could listen to our original podcast. Actually, those are some of our original episodes that have the most listens, or whatever you want to call that. Yes, downloads.
Of course.
Interesting.
One other thing that I got from this part,
okay,
and I'll read it as well. It says, it is hard enough to know what the market is going to do. If you don't know what you're going to do, the game is lost. And this isn't something new, but I really liked the way that it was written. I liked the succinctness of it. It's very well read. And have a plan, people. That is not just for trading. That is for your life. Okay. If you are struggling right now, if you are wanting to make some changes in your life, you got to have a plan, right? And that's really what this says. It says you got to have a plan. You can't know or predict what's going to happen if you don't have a plan. Like, it's just have a plan. So that was one of the things that I wanted to
You just reminded me of something else that stood out.
Okay.
And I went to go find it really fast.
Okay.
There's a part that it's titled Like an Ocean.
Okay.
And I'll just read this part. It says, the market is like an ocean. It moves up and down regardless of what you wish. And then skimming forward a little bit, it says, a sailor cannot control the ocean, but he can control himself. Love that.
It is really brilliant. It really is. And he actually goes on later on to define risk a little bit more, because that's the whole area where he's talking about risk. So with a sailor, it's not being able to control the ocean. It's about managing the risks. And he talks later on about what he calls businessman or businessman's risk. And I liked that as well, because I think that's really something that people can understand. There's, given in retail, when you order a certain amount of product, there's a risk associated with it. And that risk is whether or not you're going to be able to sell that product, because you've paid for it. And the intention with the business is that you're going to pay for this product and then sell it for a profit, make it happen that way. That's how you run your business. There's an educated guess that happens. So when you first dive into business, you may not know really, how much you need to purchase in order to meet the demand. You might know a little bit because you've done some research and you kind of have an idea of what the supply demand is, but you kind of tiptoe into it and you get a little bit and you sell out. So you buy some more and you start to develop some trends and some habits of how much you're going to have in your inventory, right? That would be the businessman's risk that he's talking about. You wouldn't just open a business and then dive $1 million into product without having any understanding of what the demand is, without having any understanding of how much product you could actually sell in a given time period before it actually expires or before it, whatever. So that's the difference. And for somebody to do that would be more attuned to gambling versus the businessman's risk. So I did like the way that he was explaining that. So thank you for bringing that up.
No problem. Well, and I do appreciate that he goes into emotional trading too. It's all kind of tied in there. So that's always important. I think his points are going to be important. I am interested to see what's going to happen in part 2.
Absolutely. So we will see you in the next episode.